It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Ha! A little low on the high notes there. Oh, well. It's that sort of week. I took some extra time this week because a lot of very interesting, thought-provoking discussion got kicked up this week, obviously, because we dealt with some big stuff this week. We dealt with the intersection of classism and racism. We dealt with, gender quotas among the top companies in the World Economic Forum. And then we dealt with the decision to publish that dossier with BuzzFeed that some people are calling fake news. So obviously opinions are going to run strong. And I took some extra time before commenting on these comments because, first of all, I think it's kind of boring to constantly tell people, like, look, people are going to be less likely to listen to your point if you start off by telling them they're being ridiculous. Just make your point. Deal with the facts. Don't get bogged down in the pageantry of what you see on cable news and what you see on the internet, and stop with the insults. Not because it's, necessarily the wrong thing to do. It just makes you less effective. It makes people want to listen to you less. So a lot of the comments I'm going to address did suffer from that. I would much rather someone just say, this is classism, for instance, as one commenter did, because that's just a factual statement, right? Then you are being ridiculous. This is classism. Well, the problem with telling me I'm being ridiculous is I actually did say, and this is in the video on redlining in U.S. cities, I did say that it was the intersection of racism and class. And the most common comment that I saw repeated was, what do we do about it? And a lot of people pointed out that you can't force people to open businesses in bad neighborhoods and so on and so forth. You don't have to. As someone who grew up in one of these neighborhoods, somebody who grew up in a black neighborhood but isn't black, it's an interesting perspective, right? Because I saw firsthand how black people were treated differently even by local business owners. Now, what has to happen is that black people and all people have to be empowered to be able to open up viable businesses in their own neighborhoods. And the best person to figure out what a neighborhood needs is somebody who lives in that neighborhood. They understand how to make it work. And I mean, that's the issue there. A lot of people thought the neighborhoods were bad, so people were denied credit. And that wasn't, in fact, so. You have to remember that at the time of coming out of the Great Depression, almost every neighborhood in America was bad. There was the Dust Bowl. There were, people were starving. There were tent cities because people were homeless. It was a bad time. So this idea that those neighborhoods looked back then, what they look like now, is not so. It wasn't that the neighborhoods were better or worse. It was that black people tended to live in the older sections of a city. The places in cities now that are being gentrified and turned into hipster condos? At least that's what's happening in Toronto. People are being pushed out of historically black neighborhoods in Toronto by redevelopment because there's all these cool old buildings that used to be factories and used to be, neat, brick buildings that hipsters now want. And so these, millennial professionals who want the cool condo but don't want to pay a whole ton, they're pushing people out. And one person pointed out that gentrification was pushing out certain non-white populations. And it gives me hope that people are looking at a deeper look at these views. And, the question, that what do we do question, is fair. Just based on my experiences, I think you have to... How do we do this? Because, okay, we know there are practices that were actively pushing subprime mortgages on Black people through the churches. And that stuff, it's easy to say it's gotta stop. The only way it can stop is through more oversight. And the big problem with the subprime mortgage thing is that people were basing wild spending on these algorithms that weren't tested enough. So these algorithms started so late in terms of how they checked it that if they'd gone back a little further, they would have discovered things like the Great Depression and stuff that happened in Soviet era Russia and things like that. So they're using bad tools. And I think that one of the things that we can do is reduce debt of all kinds. But student debt is a big one, because someone going to college, let's face it, and I'm going to talk about this in terms of class, and please understand that there are certain class factors that impact Black people more often, but economic status is really the big deal here. Whether you're a poor white person or a, lower income Black, come from a lower income Black family, and you have to take out a student loan, you have the same issues coming out in that, you already have student debt. You can't take out a small business line of credit. You're already drowning in 5 figures of debt, sometimes 6. So this is an issue. Now, then you get into hiring practices and all this stuff that I don't want to get into here because it's slightly off topic, and it's an unwinnable fight. Some people will just refuse to accept that some big companies are still, they'll give the interview to Barry O'Bannon. They won't give the interview to Barack Hussein Obama. And people forget that Barack Obama went by Barry for a while, and he talks about why in his book. But the first thing we do is deal with student debt for all people. And the question is, what do you do about it? Do you make college free for everybody? And that doesn't make any sense, because here's the thing. You can only touch public colleges in this. And I'm even taking on Bernie Sanders' cadences here. This is so funny. But no matter what plan the government enacts, if public college is free, then that basically becomes high school. It's something available to everyone. And so all employers start doing then is ignoring the public college and continuing to look at Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Columbia. What do these things have in common? They're private schools. And the thing about private colleges is they accept public money to greater or lesser degrees, but public colleges still exist. The only way women's colleges can continue to exist in the U.S. is because they're private schools. They don't take government money, because you are not allowed to be a sex-segregated college in the U.S. unless you're a private school. So I really did think that the thinking Hillary Clinton had, where economic cost is tied to income in terms of education, basically people pay what they can afford, nobody's going into debt. I think that debt-free college instead of free tuition is a much better argument, and some people want to tune it out just because Hillary Clinton said it, but hear me out. Because Bernie Sanders is now talking debt-free college too. Someone like, a Washington elite who makes enough money to send their kid to school, we're not talking about them anyway. They're all going to the private schools to begin with. So it's a bit disingenuous. The question is, should a family making $300,000 a year on paper pay the same amount as a family making $50,000 a year on paper? And this is a difficult thing for me to talk about because I got in a trap where I couldn't get a college loan because on paper, my family made too much money. In reality, my mother was still paying off her divorce, and my parents had an agreement that because my stepdad had 2 kids beforehand, that they agreed that he wasn't going to help pay for my school. And of course, the household income was overwhelmingly his at the time. So I got caught by that on paper thing. And this is why I think there's no substitute for one-to-one taking people who want to learn, who want to go to school, and figuring out how to make it work for them. Now, the problem is here, then somebody's accountable, then someone's to blame. When it's a person empowered to make a decision, then that means they're on the hook if it goes wrong. And the current system is so punitive, nobody wants to be that person. But I think that's the only way around it. I think you have to sit someone down and really figure out, how do we get this kid into college? One way or the other. If the parents don't seem willing to help, well, the kid shouldn't be punished for that. And I was punished for that. I was not allowed to fulfill my academic potential because my household was not pulling their weight in terms of what society said they should be doing. Well, what do you do about that? And that's why I think that if somebody has exceptional grades, why would you tell someone with an A+ average? We don't have the SAT numbers. We don't have the 4.0. We don't have the grade point averages up here. But I had I don't remember, it was something between a 92 and a 94 average going into college. And there weren't any merit scholarships except at the one school I attended, but those merit-based scholarships ended after the first year. And this is a problem. So let's bring back the merit-based scholarships. If a kid does exceptionally well in high school, they should be rewarded for that by being able to afford to go to the best school they can possibly go to. And that shouldn't matter what school you go to, because the other problem is that universities look differently, at least up here, at your application and your grades based on where you go to school. A B+ in a school in a good neighborhood is considered equivalent to an A+, a neighborhood I grew up in. And that is only going to get worse if school choice becomes a thing. So if a kid does exceptionally well in a bad school, they're penalized for being at a bad school, even though it's no fault of their own. And I think that these are the sorts of things we can do something about. Because if somebody comes out of school with no debt, then it's much easier for them to take out a small business loan and start their own business with the knowledge they obtained through school. I think that perhaps people should be encouraged to start small businesses even while they're in school, because more and more we're looking like this is going to be a small and medium business-driven economy in future. So that's why I say we start first. That's something we can do something about, because it's very hard to tackle the big corporate interests when there doesn't really seem to be anybody especially interested in tackling those big corporate interests in power right now. Right. Okay. And yes, there will be some fraud in the system. I knew students who were defrauding OSAP when OSAP is the Ontario Student Assistance Program. That was the student loan that I couldn't get because my parents made too much money on paper. But I knew people whose parents were pressuring them to claim they were living on residence, claim they were living outside the home to get more money for the family. And of course, that meant the kid graduated with more debt. And so it's difficult because you can't, on the one hand, you have to separate the kids from their parents in terms of, judgments here. But you do have to be careful that there is some oversight. And yes, people will defraud it. But I'm an innocent until proven guilty type of person. I believe that if 9 people are given access to quality education that improves their long-term quality of life, that's okay that a couple people defraud the system, right? If it's like 10% or lower, I'm okay with that certain amount of corruption. Corruption is something you minimize. It's not something you can eliminate completely. And I know that's an unpopular view in a lot of circles, but it's just the practical view, right? So that's my suggestion there. Moving on to the gender quota at the UN thing. People, this is a difficult thing because some people repeat stereotypes thinking it's fact because they've heard very smart people repeat these stereotypes. And one of the stereotypes that was repeated is that women aren't executives because they want to have kids. And so they quit. And that's actually not what women in those professions are saying. A lot of women don't want to have to choose between work and family. And the reality is that women have to choose between work and family to a greater extent than men do. That is an issue right there. A guy doesn't physically have a baby. So a guy can continue to work all the way through his wife having a baby. Maternity leave is not an issue. And, this is a difficult thing. A guy can feel intense pressure at his job to not be there for his wife while she is giving birth to their child, right? Whereas a woman, we don't have a choice. Pregnancy is tough on the body, and some women have it tougher than others. And then, there's the whole question of, well, that kid is your responsibility. So somebody has to not be working 80-hour work weeks. And I personally think nobody should be working an 80-hour work week. I believe that. Because if you are working an 80-hour work week, that is because your company is denying a job to somebody else. There should be 2 people working 40-hour work weeks. We have seen that there are detrimental health consequences to working 80-hour work weeks. Nobody should be doing it. And I say this as somebody who works an 80-hour week. I try very hard to take weekends off. It never happens. And I am exhausted. And I know I am. And I keep going because there's nobody else to do it for me. But let me tell you, I don't work 80 hours a week by choice. I do it because I have to. And it's not that they don't enjoy making content for you guys. It's that you can enjoy doing something and recognize that it's killing you, and that's, they know that the life expectancy discrepancy between men and women, and I mean, God, you look at some of the tables in that chart that I referenced about gender equality, there's a 10-year gap in life expectancy in some places. The Russian Federation is a notable one, and its lifestyle. And so, it's almost like we're going backwards. We're asking women to be stupid in ways because men are already stupid in those ways. Instead of going, wait a minute, should men be doing this? Is this healthy for men? And if it isn't, why are we making men do this? And we're making men do this because men have always done it. Well, that doesn't mean it's right. And that doesn't mean it's good. And it's actually not true that men have always done this. I mean, going back before the, invention of electric lights, work stopped at dark. So people couldn't work 80-hour weeks. They could only work when the sun was up. And that's still the case in developing parts of the world. And it's really funny because they go in there and put in lights and put in all these things, and they don't have books. They give these kids computers, and there's no electricity in their villages to run them. I mean, they're completely missing the conditions on the ground in these places, and they look like assholes. And, I don't think that the solution here is to encourage women to work 80-hour weeks. I think the realization that we should be having here is it is wrong for men to be expected to work 80-hour weeks. And I believe very strongly in that. I think that a 40-hour work week wasn't something that somebody pulled arbitrarily out of their ass like the size of an airplane seat, which was apparently completely arbitrary. A 40-hour work week is the thing they've determined is the healthiest number of hours of work, especially people in sedentary jobs, which, let's face it, a lot of those tech jobs are quite sedentary. And we need to start seeing this crunch phenomenon, this working 80-hour weeks, not as showing that someone's a dedicated employee. No, it should be seen as a sign of shitty management. And we start doing that, and we'll start to address these problems. And I hope you agree with me, because this is actually saying, let's make things easier for everybody. And the people who are going to benefit most from this are guys, and I'm fine with that, because women will benefit indirectly in that, guess what? Their husbands will be home to be a co-parent, to be a proper co-parent. And instead of trying to get more and more and more hours of work out of an employee, let's start recognizing that let's work smarter, not longer. The phenomenon for me that crystallizes this is the idea of a standing desk. Because people were sitting too long. People were working hours that are so long, they were tied to that damn desk. They had no ability to get up and move. And instead of recognizing we need to give our employees an opportunity to get some exercise during the day, what did they do? They put in these asshole standing desks. And guess what the science is doing? They've come out, oh gee, this doesn't solve the problem because it's still sedentary. It's sedentary standing instead of sedentary sitting, and any checkout worker who has plantar fasciitis could have told you that. But they don't want to go, yeah, we're working our employees too hard. Japan is finally addressing this issue because people were dropping dead and committing suicide. So this is something that we can do something about. But our thinking has to shift from this idea that abusive employees is a normal state of things because guys do it. Guys should not be pressured in the ways they are. And I'm running out of time. I want to move on to the next thing, but I feel very strongly with this. And it's like, please, before you spew the same old nonsense that people have been saying since the 1950s, stop and think about what you're actually saying. And stop and think about whether you're actually just saying the problem is unsolvable in a lot of words. Because I don't believe that any problem is unsolvable. I believe we have problems to solve them, but that's just the way my brain works. Moving on to that, I want to talk about the idea of fake news. Because most people really liked the David Auerbach interview. And I really appreciate the people who, even though they didn't agree, they still enjoyed the dialogue, because this is the whole purpose of a show called Dialogue Options. Okay? It's in part to challenge people's thinking. And we can't do that if it's everybody just agreeing all the time. I personally love programming that challenges me without being sensational about it. And one person said I'm being just like Alex Jones because I did an interview. And I was like, this is just, I could get mad at this, but this is a deliberate provocation, and so I'm not going to do it. No, my content is nothing like Alex Jones. I bring people on who I find interesting and talk to them about something. There is no requirement that you agree with what they're saying. But that doesn't mean they are, for God's sakes, Alex Jones? Like, you couldn't have picked a better comparison? Anyway, the whole idea of fake news is a difficult one, because first of all, the alt-right is brilliant. I sit there and watch them do this over and over and again. It's brilliant tactics. I don't know what to do about it. There's no counter for it. But the minute they get accused of something, they then start accusing everyone of it, so the word has no bite. They did it with racism. They did it with sexism. They did it with fake news. And the latest one is fake news, that there was a lot of fake news running up to the election. A lot of it was anti-Hillary Clinton. And I don't even believe that's a pro-right-wing bias. There is a unique anti-Clinton bias in America that as a Canadian, I will never understand. Because the left hates them too. And by them, I mean the whole family. But it was an issue. And it's a huge problem that people rightly don't trust the news media anymore because people don't want to be taken for fools and they're very afraid of fake news. The problem is we're talking about fake news with no accepted definition of what fake news is. And I looked into this to try to find a definition, but every source I read had a different definition of fake news. The one people can agree on was the idea that fake news is false information deliberately circulated by people who want to advance particular, as the BBC says, often extreme political causes and make money, clickbait sort of thing. That is the general acceptance of fake news. But some services like the BBC, which is a highly respected news outlet, so I can't just disregard this definition. They also add false information that's circulated by journalists who don't realize it's false. And then they said the third type of fake news is anything that causes Donald Trump discomfort. I think that was a bit of a joke, but they were specifically referring to the targeting of CNN last week when it was actually BuzzFeed that published the dossier. And that conflation was why I wanted to have a discussion with someone who understands online stuff. And I didn't want it to be a partisan. That's precisely my thinking went into it. I didn't want it to be somebody with an axe to grind here. Yes, he identifies as a liberal, but he doesn't work for any political party. And the vast majority of people thought it was a good discussion, but there were those people in the comments, and they could just be trolls, right? They could just be trolls. I stand by thinking we gave it a fair hearing, that we made it clear that things are not necessarily true in that document. And, I even brought up the most salacious stuff in that dossier. Who cares? Who cares? And yet people still accused me of fake news. And here's why I push back on that idea of fake news. First of all, it has been confirmed by Vice President Joe Biden that he and Barack Obama were briefed in a 2-page synopsis of the contents of the dossier. That is the point that is newsworthy. The fact that this stuff was considered serious enough by the intelligence community to brief both the president and the president-elect. That is absolutely newsworthy. I personally believe, for the record, that whether or not Donald Trump hired a couple of prostitutes to pee on a bed in Russia, it's not verified. We can't even claim it's true. I don't even believe the rumor is newsworthy. I do believe that in the greater backdrop of Russian meddling into the U.S. political system and its key figures, I do think that it is newsworthy to report that the U.S. intelligence community treated this seriously enough to brief various heavy hitters. And that's factual. It was confirmed. It was verified by multiple sources. So that's not fake news. And if you want to persuade people to do better, don't accuse them of something that's not true. Okay? So here's my question to you guys, and I'm running a bit over a half an hour because there were serious things to deal with here. But how do we collectively be more effective in these disagreements? Because I think it's very important to have some sort of dialogue, have some sort of communication with people you don't agree with. And I wish I could sit down and talk to every single one of you. I'm at something of a disadvantage in this sort of one-to-many broadcast, but that it's a many-to-one feedback process. So the way I've been trying to deal with it is just deal with a smattering, a handful of conversations each week to try to be somewhat responsive. But it's really wearing me down to the sheer amount of name calling. And it's wearing me down because it just strikes me like noise. Like, why would I listen to this? Why would I pick a comment where someone is being belligerent over someone who knows how to keep a civil tongue in their keyboard? You know what I mean? Like, I'd much rather respond to the guy who says this is classism and say, yes, I absolutely agree. And if I wasn't clear enough about the fact that, yes, this is classism, here we go. I can clarify this is the purpose of ending the week with these programs. But I don't feel like I should dignify "you're being ridiculous" with a response. But I know that's the way of Reddit, and that's the way of Chan, and that's the way of the internet, that, oh, we're going to do this performance online that we all call each other stupid and call it free speech. And yes, it is, but it's not effective speech. So does this sound fair to you guys? You know, should I just continue to reward civil disagreement as opposed to people who result to ad hominem and insult? And I recognize that not everybody considers "you're being ridiculous" an ad hominem insult. I do. Because you can't prove I'm being ridiculous, commenter. That's your opinion. And you didn't have to say that. You could just provide a concise counter-argument to what I'm talking about. And I'm not aiming for policing speech. No, I want a more effective back and forth. That's what I'm looking for. And I'm trying to figure out exactly what that is, because I leave comments open. And like I've shown, I've addressed some of these responses, even though they were insulting. The question, the thing I'm struggling with is, we know that if you respond to the squeaky wheels in this way, it gets worse. And so I try to reward the people who have shown an ability to just state their opinion without being rude. Because those are the types of comments I want to cultivate. Those are most useful. If someone does not seem overly angry and someone can disagree in a way that seems like they're not letting their emotions get the better of them, well, I think that's worth time spent on those people. I also understand that this is something of a learning process, and I don't want to totally tone argument people. And I don't want to totally dismiss things based on the way someone chose to express themselves, or who they chose to quote, or who they chose to invoke. So any suggestions you guys have for how to sort of split down the middle in terms of those concerns, I'd greatly appreciate. Looking forward to seeing what you say about that. Have a great weekend. We'll hopefully be back on Monday with Momo Monday.